evening, everyone. I'm Neha Dadij, a three-year law student from Jain Naran Vyas University, Jodhpur. Welcome to this webinar by Glolex Liga on misuse of women-centric laws in India with our eminent speaker, Mr. Jayant Bhatt. Let me tell you a little about Glolex Liga. Glolex Liga is a train of knowledge to lead you towards the world of law. It's an initiative by Mr. Bhumesh Verma, Managing Partner of Corpcom Legal, Delhi. Glolex Liga is a global legal group for professionals like practicing lawyers, honorable judges, in-house legal counsels, law students, company secretaries, researchers, academicians, and anyone who wants to learn about the world of law. Our purpose is we are built as an integrated platform to share and seek knowledge about law, to interpret laws and judgments through articles and blogs, to understand laws, remedies, current affairs, and many more better by the means of webinars and podcasts by experts. We are focused in guiding the Indian public with the basic and rightful laws they are provided with as per the Indian Constitution and other laws, to make laws easily accessible and understandable for general public to utilize and use from. You as a student or even as an expert, you can share your articles and blogs on Glolex Liga. Why you should be a member? On Glolex Liga, you can share your knowledge and life experiences through your articles, blogs, webinars, and even podcasts. You can put your queries and receive satisfying answer in no time with utmost clarity and reasonability. You can find interpretation of various laws in forms of articles and blogs by various professionals. You can enhance your writing skills and ability to think with various competitions by Glolex Liga. You can be a part and even an organizer of any event you wish to conduct. You can grow and improve your network. You can have global audience for your submissions as well. How can you be a member? You can be a member by filling out the membership application form in the link. For any more queries, you can contact us at info@glolexliga.com. You can join our LinkedIn groups, which is Glolex Liga. You can also contact Mr. Bhumesh Verma on LinkedIn and Neha Dadij, which is me, on LinkedIn or on Instagram, wherever you are comfortable. Thank you. Hope to see you soon as a proud member of Glolex Liga community. Moving on to our webinar for today, which is on misuse of women-centric laws in India with Mr. Jayant Bhatt. Let me give you a brief about Mr. Jayant Bhatt, although he does not need an introduction, but Mr. Jayant Bhatt is an independent lawyer and the member of prestigious Supreme Court Bar Association and Delhi High Court Bar Association. He has a varied clientele of governmental and non-governmental bodies, financial institutes, and individuals. Holding dual master's degree in law from New York University, USA, and National University of Singapore, he is not only an eminent advocate but also an eloquent speaker. Mr. Bhatt is also a creator of his YouTube channel, See You Soon, where he regularly creates videos relating to laws, current affairs, and other relevant topics. He is also interested in mentoring various young minds and is ever ready to share his thoughts and knowledge. Mr. Bhatt is regularly seen in many columns and news articles for his thoughts. Today we will be discussing with him about the misuse of women-centric laws and how some of the women have been misusing the laws provided to them instead of using them for their own and others' welfare. Mr. Bhatt, I'd like to transfer this.
But then I think historically speaking and traditionally looking at the way our country is, look at majority of the households. Look at the housewives who are either financially dependent on their husband, or who have traditionally not been allowed to work either in offices or in other setups. They are dependent for their income, for their financial upbringing, either first eventually on their father when they're children, and when they grow up, when they're married, when they adopt a household or a matrimonial household, then they are completely dependent either on the father-in-law or on the husband. And I think in the wake of all this, the laws that have been developed in the country have come to be. I remember when I was a kid growing in the 80s and in the early 90s, one thing was that the dowry, a lot of movies around dowry, and the law about dowry harassment was debated upon, and initially people used to think that we have absolutely no laws protecting the women. I think slowly and surely the parliament also enacted the Dowry Prohibition Act. Then we had 498A now, which everybody knows about, coupled with 304B and everything. So I think what we need to realize, is how do we protect these laws, and laws which are there in the country are abused not just by women but by men, by third gender, by anybody who has to abuse them. For example, if you see politicians, they also use the law to their advantage sometimes to get a FIR lodged or to settle scores with their political rivals. Similarly, I think when we speak of women-centric laws, and especially in today's day and age, when a lot of clients come to me, both husband and wife, and I'm giving you a completely matrimonial scenario here, and they say, "What can you do for us?" So if I'm representing the wife, there are 3 or 4 batch matters that we regularly advise them. One is the Domestic Violence Act, if she has been subjected to any domestic violence. Matrimonial rape is still not recognized in India, but if she has been subjected to any sexual misconduct, then we advise them if they want to pursue Section 377 of IPC, because that is unnatural sex and that falls outside the ambit of rape. Then obviously we have 498A. We have maintenance if the wife in this particular matter is not financially independent, or if she's not working, or if she was working but has left the job for different reasons. So there comes a cluster of matters. But if a husband comes to me and say that my wife has lodged 3 to 4 matters against me, what can I do? So there are basic suggestions that we give them. One is obviously you can file for divorce. That's the right of either party. Also, if there are legal heirs or children or issues born out of the wedlock, then we advise them that you can file a custody matter. If it's a matter where international clientele is involved and one of the parties has run away with the child or with the children, then we file sometimes habeas corpus, in high courts directly contesting those cases. So sometimes as a lawyer you have to devise, and you have to look within the legal ambit as to what are the recourses available to you and in and around you. So I don't think people don't have any legal defenses or offenses. There are multiple sections, and one of the common sections that is quite used by our clients is Section 380 of Indian Penal Code, which means theft in a dwelling house. So, for example, sometimes a mother-in-law or even a father-in-law can say, "Look, there was some jewelry belonging to my wife or my husband, which has been taken away by the wife, which was not a part of Stridhan, and FIR can be lodged against it." So, I think I would not say it's only the women misusing the law or just the men misusing the law or using the law, but it's how you temper and treat your client, and what type of legal advice can you give them. And based on the advice that you give them, they have to eventually formulate an opinion, and based on that opinion they have to act on the advice which is being given by the council.
Sorry, that's so right, and I absolutely agree with you, sir. So I guess we'll start with questions for webinar now. So my first question to you is whether the guidelines laid down by the SC in Rajesh Kumar and others versus State of UP, subsequently modified in Social Action Forum for Manav Adhikar versus Union of India, in respect of cases falling under Section 498A, sufficient for curbing the misuse?
Right. Look, both these cases were decided by the Supreme Court. The first one that you mentioned was by a division bench, and the later was by a 3-judge bench. And I think what the Supreme Court did basically was to remedy the malady which had occurred in the first case. And what the Supreme Court eventually decided that any court in this country, especially Supreme Court, because they were dealing with the Supreme Court judgment, cannot decide any matter which is beyond the scope of statute. So in these cases, the matter was concerning Indian Penal Code and dowry harassment and other things. And I think the initial order had ruled on the constitution of a family welfare committee by the different district legal services authorities across the country, and then they prescribed that the duties of the committees and further actions and how should they be taken. But the 3-judge bench in the subsequent matter said, look, you are going out of the ambit of IPC. IPC does not gives you that right to play with the law in a manner that you deem fit. You have to decide a case on the basis of the laws which have been structured by the parliament or by the legislatures in the country. Furthermore, another direction which the Supreme Court issued was that in most of the Section 498A matters, people who are deciding on ground, especially the investigating officers, have to be very careful and they have to be guided, by the principles which have been propounded initially by the Supreme Court in various landmark judgments, like Joginder Kumar versus State of UP, D.K. Basu, we all know is a famous case, D.K. Basu versus State of West Bengal, then the Lalita Kumari judgment, which was recently adjudicated a few years ago, Arnesh Kumar. Supreme Court said you have to keep in mind the guidelines which we have already laid down in these landmark judgments. And then also, I think the other dictum that the Supreme Court laid down is, look, while you're disposing of a 498A case, it cannot be disposed of randomly by a district or a session judge, as in they do not have the power within themselves to quash a matter. Quashing a matter is an exclusive right under Code of Criminal Procedure, or CRPC as we popularly call it, under Section 482, only by the High Courts of this country. So a district court does not have the right to quash a matter or to, get the matter compounded when it has to be quashed only and only by the High Court. So those are the directions, which were given by the Supreme Court. Then I think there was also some direction which was given regarding the clubbing of the matters for appearance of all the family members, especially if, they are coming from outstation to a particular district court to contest their matter by way of video conferencing. So the court has said that, for that direction, they cannot give a blanket order, and on ground, we all know that I think Supreme Court has been doing video conferencing since March last year. But on ground, the reality across the country is very different. Either we do not have bandwidth, or there is a poor internet connectivity, or even in Delhi, we are struggling in the district courts. So considering all the scenarios, the Supreme Court said, look, you can always move an application under Section 205 or Section 317 of the CRPC, and you can seek an exemption, or you can ask for clubbing of the matter from your concerned trial court judge. But we cannot, guarantee you something through this judgment. And it's quite practical of Supreme Court, because we are all grappling as to how to use technology to our advantage. So I think in both these matters, Supreme Court took the time to re-examine the error that I think the previous bench had committed, and they've rectified the error by saying, look, don't go beyond the domain of any statute which has already been laid down by the Parliament. As courts, our job is to decide and interpret the law. Let's stick to that.
That is a really important thing to do in any case possible, right? So let's move to our next question, which is, what are the steps that can be taken by the government for overhaul of the judicial system, because courts really don't have the power to effectively implement the guidelines issued by them?
Look, there are 2-3 things. This is a question, people regularly keep asking me, and I think the only thing that we need to do and primarily focus on is how best can we garner funding for the courts. We have too less number of judges in the country vis-a-vis the population ratio that we have. And I keep giving people this example of Supreme Court all the time, because I think we have a sanction strength in Supreme Court of 32 judges. At any point in time, judges keep retiring and new judges are, are sworn in, and they, take upon their duty. But imagine at a given time, there are about 24 to 26 average judges or average strength in Supreme Court for a population of a country of 1 billion people. Now you can do the maths, right? And Supreme Court today has, and I'm sorry to say this, but has become something like a Mephistal court, because every matter, even a motor accident claim tribunal, a matrimony matter, everything comes to Supreme Court. And the basic structure of Supreme Court is to decide the constitutionality of important matters. But today, every Tom, Dick and Harry in the country is going to Supreme Court, filing PILs, coming to Supreme Court on random matters and asking them to decide on these issues. And there are only 25 judges for a whole country. So I think that's the matter of pride. Now this is Supreme Court. You take the matters of High Court. High Courts are no different. Take the example of Delhi High Court. Delhi High Court, I think, has a sanction strength of about 66 judges. Out of those 66 judges, I think they are working at a functionality of 50% judges strength. About 30, 35 or 36 sanction strength of judges. And then you take the ratio of other high courts in the country. So it's really appalling, I mean, the Ministry of Law and Justice and the government, both central and state, I think, have to put their heads together and have to decide what type of funding is adequately required. One, to make the judiciary robust, and also to ensure that we have adequate number of judges to decide a matter. If you go, look, you are a law student, I'm sure you would have done your internships. You, in your internship, go to any district court in the country or go to any high court in the country. At any given day, one judge on an average is deciding 50 to 100 matters. That is one judge. Now, if I am to give you 100 files a day, even as a lawyer, to read, it will drive you crazy. I mean, you will obviously go bonkers, right? I mean, and then not only are you deciding the cases, you have administrative duties to discharge, you have other social commitments, you have personal commitments, at the end of the day, you are a human being. So, accordingly, I say at least for Supreme Court, people sometimes laugh at the suggestion, but I say at least our Supreme Court needs to have 100 to 200 judges. The way the litigation are increasing and the people for every resort are, heading to Supreme Court, I think we definitely need more judges across the country. We need more number of courtrooms. And I think definitely we need less number of, tribunals to decide a matter. And I'm not a great fan of alternate dispute resolution. I think it is more like you have privatized the judiciary. Because once you have mediation, once you have arbitration, especially in matrimony matters, you have pre-litigation mediation, you have post-litigation mediation, and net result is nothing happens because parties still want to fight. They have had such a bitter relationship in most of the cases. They want to litigate. They have been wronged, either the husband or the wife or the in-laws. It becomes a matter of money. If somebody has been actually harassed, if somebody has been whether they were the incident of domestic violence in a relationship, mental, physical tortures, all those things crop up. So for that, I think, mediation, if it happens with the consent of the parties during the litigation fatigue, as we popularly call it, it's fine. But, pre-litigation mediation, I think is a waste of time. I've seen it failing so many times than succeeding, both in High Court and in the DLSA cells established by the Delhi government also. So I think there has to be streamlined structure. And also there has to be a timeline in terms of how quickly can you decide a matter. So for example, when I started my career, I was in UAE. And in UAE, the fantastic thing is from their lowest court to their highest court, the time duration that you have to decide every matter is 3 years. In India, it's a laughable issue if you say a matter will be sorted in three years. At least, every time a client comes to me, I say, at least take 2 years on average for a matter, or at least you to fight and, get it out of the system. And then you go to a court, the normal adjournment date, and thanks to Corona also now, there's so much of, as it is, there was pendency. Corona is like the cherry on top. So I think now the regular date that we are now getting in courts is about 4 to 5 months adjournment. And it's a sheer harassment for litigants. So I think as I said, more number of judges, funding has to be pumped. I still, can't take out the image of Justice Thakur in tears in Vigyan Bhavan when he was the Chief Justice of the country. And when he had to give that speech saying, people are very quick to blame the judiciary. The judges don't do a thing, but I think on the contrary, it's the government which is not providing the funding to the courts and to the infrastructure that we need. Now, Supreme Court has a great way of doing video conferencing, and other courts in the country have tried their best to replicate it. I think Gujarat High Court has done a wonderful thing by live streaming it, but we need this system to be uniform across from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. And till the time we do not have the last mile reach and availability of justice delivery in this country, whatever law, be it matrimony, be it otherwise, is going to be abused left, right, and center, either by men or women, doesn't really matter. Madam, you have to mute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I agree with you. So just like we all must have watched the movie Jolly LLB, where the judge in the end says that we have thousands of cases on per judge. So we absolutely need more judges and less time, the time frame for the cases to be completed. So now let's move to our main topic, the misuse of women-centric laws. So my third question is, should the court award monetary compensation in cases where presence of an ulterior motive behind insulting the case is established beyond reasonable doubts?
See, I'll answer this in both yes and no. In an ideal world, yes, the court should award compensation to somebody who has been wronged, especially the criminal courts, because otherwise, if you tell a party to go and file a civil case altogether, we know on an average, at least a civil matter in this country goes for 10 to 15 years. That's the average shell life of a civil suit. But the other thing is, how do you decide whether a suit or a case was, maliciously prosecuted? For example, if the parties amongst themselves decide, to bury their hatchet and to put a case to rest, then this issue doesn't arise. If after a prolonged litigation, somebody stands acquitted, still, there may not be a cogent ground that it was a malicious prosecution or it was, a misplaced complaint. Because at the end of the day, when you look at any trial in the country or in the world, the prosecution or the complainant may fail to establish their case, but that does not mean that it was malicious. The prosecution was malicious. So, too many factors have to be looked into. So that's why I said the answer can be both yes and no. If the court is of the opinion that yes, perhaps it was a case of malicious prosecution, parties were unnecessarily dragged, then you also have to ascertain who do you pin the blame to, because was it just the party, or in a criminal case, if a FIR is lodged, with the police being hand in gloves with the investigating officer and his team or her team, filing the case without application of mind, doing a shoddy investigation, and then making a bogus case against somebody. Should the police, find a mechanism to compensate the victims from their salaries or from their pensions? So I think it's a wider debate. I don't think any government is going to buckle under such suggestion yet. Maybe in the future, 10-20 years down the line, things may change. But I don't see these things happening in the next 5-10 years.
Absolutely not in 10 to 5 years, but I guess we should be working on it as a lawyer or as a judge, whosoever be, should be working towards it for compensating those who have been falsely accused, because obviously their lives have been ruined to some extent and their image have been ruined to some extent. So we must be giving them compensate. So I hope we'll be working towards it as a
Look,
society.
the flip side of this would be MJ Akbar's case. The hashtag Me Too movement can be taken both in the right manner and in the wrong manner.
Right,
but when MJ Akbar goes for a defamation, one judge in Patiala House Court says, look, it was not a defamation. So what this lady was saying 30 years ago was right. So who is going to compensate him? Not only has he lost his portfolio, he has also lost a case after prolonged litigation.
Right.
So there are both sides to a case. That's why I said the trial is very important. And that's why we have the whole appellate system. But I think the appellate system has to be time bound. And that's the only way in which a person can actually be, vindicated.
Yes, right. I absolutely agree with that. So moving to our next question. Should the government bring in rules to insulate the office of prosecutor from the police? The aim of the prosecutor should be to make sure that the case is pursued efficiently and justice be done. The aim of the prosecution right now is to make sure the accused is held guilty.
Look, I think we are trying to live in a utopian world. That's not how the world works. I have appeared for the state. I still represent the government in High Court, and I'll give you my example. I was representing state of Rajasthan in Supreme Court from 2014 to 2019 for 5 years, and majority of my matters came on the criminal side. And as interesting as my life was, because I still consider myself to be a trial lawyer, and from the defense as a criminal defense lawyer. One day you'll be in Patiala House, Tisari, or other district courts, and the same day I would have to rush to Supreme Court and argue the matter for the state on the criminal side. But never did, and appeal obviously is different from conducting a full-fledged trial as a prosecutor. But for the sake of argument, and for the sake of illustration, let me tell you that, when you're representing a state, even in a criminal side, you assume the role of a prosecutor. So I would not, agree to whatever the police was saying. I would still question them if they would come to brief me and ask them, why has a particular thing happened? Why was this investigation, lacking in a particular area? And I think that is the role of every prosecutor who is, assigned a file, assigned a matter. Even when a charge sheet is supposed to be filed, they are vetted by the prosecution agencies, and a prosecution agency also has a very tough role. So I don't think it's a matter of being hand in glove. It's a matter of how rightly have you investigated a matter, because the prosecutor at the end of the day is only going to rely on the charge sheet which is filed in the court. Or perhaps tell the investigating agency to do their job properly. But police is the first pit stop. The moment you dial 100 number, especially in a women-centric matter, be it a dowry death, be it harassment, be it domestic violence, be it a normal skirmish between husband, wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend, or 11 couples. The first point of reference is always the police. So they have to do a good job. But then, look at the wider picture. The wider picture is, police 100 number is the most abused number. And if you have had any opportunity to go to a trial court, there are, in every criminal court, in a magistrate court, in a session court, there's a police person who is assigned to that particular court called a NAB court. At least in Delhi, they are called NAB court. And if you chit chat with them, one thing, which is unanimously, agreed by these NAB courts, is that 100 number is the most abused number in the country. So I'll give you an example. So I was just talking to this NAB court, and he said, sir, mere ko 100 number pe call hai. And this boy, young man, was there, and he said, sir, my girlfriend ke saath mera breakup ho gaya, and now she's threatening me, please come and get your PCR van here. So trivial issues like this are, people feel free ki 100 number ko mila dete hain. Matlab malkana haq hai hamara police pe. So that approach has to change, and police is also, understaffed and overworked. So till the time we do not have enough number of people in the country, and it's not that we are a country of uneducated people. We have so many youth, wanting employment. So I think police people need to recruit more. Judiciary needs to recruit more people. And if we have more recruitment, I think all the debates and all the challenges that we are facing today are definitely going to cut down. That is number one. To answer your question, as I said, look, and from my personal experience, I can tell you that just because you are prosecution doesn't mean that there's a tailor-made role assigned for you that you have to prosecute come what may. I have seen good number of prosecutors also, but yes, by and large, they have a particular bent of mind that just because we have prosecution, we have to, put the last nail in the coffin of the accused, and that's the wrong approach. I think they forget that first they're lawyer, they're officers of the court, and they have to stick to the justice delivery system. But then I think the practical side is the administrative side, that once they become a prosecutor, then their promotion is there. Maybe they want to be judges in the future, judges are appointed as a judge, either in high court or in trial court. So those things start playing in their mind. But even, be that as it may, I don't think that should be any ground for you to just, robotically or mechanically decide a matter. Put your brain to it. You have studied law for 5 years, 3 years in your career. You have been in the practice for at least 7 years to become a prosecutor. And I'm assuming before a prosecutor, you were a lawyer practicing in one of the courts in the country. So don't be so mechanical about your approach. It's very disheartening.
That's right. I may have asked this question in a joke, but this is such a serious issue that some people do not take their responsibilities seriously. So, but anyway, I hope things will change. So moving on to our next question. What are the statutory remedies available for victims of malicious prosecution?
So, madam, they can definitely go and file a case of malicious prosecution, and if they think that any witness was influenced or any evidence was tempered, if any forged document was produced, again, forgery and all these things are already defined in IPC, they can go and reclaim their life. But I'll tell you the practical scenario and the flip side of this question. People don't do it, one, because our system is too slow. And by the time people want to think, they are already, they're like, good riddance. We don't want to be engaged with lawyers. We don't want to engage in the court. We don't want to waste our time. I would rather have a popcorn and go to PVR and sit and, enjoy my life. So all those things, then people want to bury the hatchet. I have not come across of too many cases in which the parties would have, tried to file a case after, their acquittal or after they have won a case. In fact, one of my clients from all these experiences in my life, elderly gentleman, I won a majority of his cases for him in High Court. And then he decided to go against his sons who had filed the case against him. And I think 2 years down the line, now he has said, I want to withdraw the matter. I don't want to fight anymore. Eventually, they are my sons. I don't want to take them to court. So again, it's a matter of what a person thinks and in what frame of mind they are in if they want to, go after a party for a malicious prosecution. So I think there are too many external factors before we apply the law, to a given case, whether a party actually wants to go for it. Or sometimes I can tell you that parties are also scared that if they file a case of malicious prosecution, the other party may file a defamation case against them. Because it's a never-ending scene. It's a vicious circle, So you file one case, I file a cross case, and then only the lawyers benefit, and the eventual losers become the litigants who are going to court. So that's not how it should happen. I think it should be the other way around. That everybody should have a win-win scenario. The litigant should be happy, the lawyer should be happy, the judge should be happy. But then again, as I said, we are talking of an ideal world which doesn't exist.
Okay. So to our next question. There are many laws to safeguard the interest of women. How many such laws do we have for men?
As I said, madam, in my opening remark, मान के चलिए लड़ाई झगड़ा हो जाता है, धक्का मुक्की हो जाती है, घूसा पड़ जाता है, या वाइफ या फीमेल लिव इन पार्टनर चाकू उठा के मार देती है किसी को, या अटेम्प्ट करती है मारने का, तो 302, 307, IPC, 323 हर्ट वगैरह के जो नॉर्मल केसेस होते हैं, ये सारे अप्लाई करते हैं. आई थिंक दे इवनली अप्लाई. So IPC में तो what applies to a man applies to a woman, applies to a third gender. So I don't think that's a matter of concern, especially for live-in cases. There was a query which came my way where I think I think a same-sex couple was there, and one person was wrong, and I said you can simply go and file 377. So there are provisions in law. It's not just women-centric law. I think we also have to look at the third gender now and then see how we can help every person in the society.
So moving on to our next question. What are some of the laws available for husband and his family in case where the daughter-in-law refuses to accept them? She threatens them and harasses them with the fake allegations.
Right, ma'am. So I think you have the standard section of 506, 509 of IPC, which talks about criminal intimidation, threat, etc. And I think just today morning, my office uploaded a similar situated video on Domestic Violence Act, where we have discussed a Supreme Court judgment and one of the Delhi High Court judgment, where we have said that even a mother-in-law has the right in law to go after the daughter-in-law or any other in-laws from the other side, because Supreme Court, I think in Hiralal Harsoda case, in I think just very recent judgment, has decided that the definition under Section 2, subsection Q of the Domestic Violence Act, which says adult male member as a respondent, has been deleted, and even the proviso is deleted. And the crux of the matter is that anybody who is living in a domestic relationship, be it the daughter-in-law, be it the mother-in-law, have the same rights in law. So you cannot distinguish that mother-in-law is the only perpetrator of the crime. So I would, as you know, in the opening comment you said we have a channel called Sue You Soon. I would say please go to Sue You Soon, and we have our latest video uploaded for your audience also, and they can check out this answer in detail. It's a 6-minute video, not very long. So if you have 6 minutes to spare in your 24 hours, the video is already there.
That's great. I hope our audience is very well aware of your channel, and who are not, please search it on YouTube and learn more about topic. Okay, so moving on to our next question. What are some of the laws, the arrest of accused is made as soon as the case is registered under Section 489A and investigation is carried out later. Do you think it should be made a bailable offense? Because as of now, it's a non-bailable offense and so on.
Right. Look, from a completely lawyer's point of view, especially as a criminal lawyer, I don't think it should be made into a bailable offense. How will lawyers earn? You have to think about our bread and butter also. But I think the lawyers already got a blow when automatic arrest was restricted by Supreme Court a few years ago. I think, I just mentioned, I think Anesh Kumar or some other judgment was there, where they said automatic arrest will not happen. And what has happened now is the moment there is a complaint, automatically FIR is not registered. Eventually it is registered, but the CAW cell, the Crime Against Women cell, which are across the country now, ask both the parties to come and mediate, and lawyers are not allowed in the CAW cell or in the mediation center which they have. And once they are happy with the answers of both the parties, sometimes they drop the extended family, sometimes they still include them in the FIR. And once the FIR is lodged, and even before that, you can apply for anticipatory bail. So I think, and routinely now it's being granted by the trial court, and especially after COVID, I think in a routine manner, the trial courts are granting anticipatory bail, especially in 498 matters, unless very, very grave offences are involved in a particular matter. So I don't think it should be made a bailable offence. I think non-bailable is fine. You have to also think it from the point of view of the woman. Look, I'm not saying all the women are misusing the law, but there are also cases in which the woman is wronged, in which the dowry is demanded, in which people try to be straight on their face, but will still, harass a woman. So I think we have to not shy away from our social realities, and law is a reflection of, what happens in society. And I think, taking that into consideration, I think it's too early to make it, bailable. I think let it be non-bailable for some time.
I somewhat agree with you, but as I may have seen some people, in a recent case, there was a person who was in jail for 20 years in a fake allegation. So this was something, this is why I put this question, that what can we do for those people, or if that should be made a non-bailable offense, a bailable offense. So,
look, if there are fake allegations, I said, at the end of the trial, you can still go and file a cross FIR. You can still file defamation. Yes, those are weaker remedies in law, so as to say. But you can also file a civil defamation. You can claim compensation from the court, because defamation can be filed both in a criminal manner under the IPC, and you can also file a suit for defamation, claiming whatever pecuniary dent or damages you may have suffered, or your reputation at large would have suffered. You can always file those cases. Yes, they are prolonged litigations. They are time consuming, but you have to think about it. It's not that law doesn't give you remedy. The thing is, you have to exercise those remedies, and you have to be patient with the courts. It's not a 2-minute noodle that you think you'll open a packet and you'll put something for cooking and the result will be instantly in front of you. Things take time. A court has to decide a matter based on evidences, based on what is being produced before them, based on the rules of natural justice. There are so many aspects to advocacy and courtcraft and how the courts operate. So I think we need more sessions like these, I would say, for legal awareness to the people at large of this country, so that they realize and they understand that courts don't work in a perfunctory manner as they believe it to be, like in Jolly LLB or in movies that they see in Bollywood. It's very easy to have a nice roll or a burger in your hand and watch a 2-minute movie or a 2-hour movie, sorry. And when you go to court, sometimes you have to wait for 2 days even for your matter to be listed and to be argued. So it's you have to be patient with the process. And when I said due process of law is there, yes, I think the whole system is very robust. I keep repeating myself on that. And I am a great believer in our judicial system. I think there are a great number of judges. There are equally great number of lawyers in the profession who are doing tremendous amount of service to their clientele and to the society at large.
That's right. So right thing. So our next question is, there is provision to presume that there is a dowry death if the wife dies within 7 years of marriage and before her death she had been subjected to cruelty. But if vice versa happens, where husband dies within 7 years of his marriage, then there is no provision to protect the deceased husband. One false allegation against husband ruins his entire career and reputation in the eyes of society. So what's your take on it?
No, it depends. I think people sometimes either don't read the law or they misread the law. So, for example, let's say somebody is dying within 7 years of marriage. Obviously, IPC provides for dowry death. Specific provision 304. Is there particularly in cases of dowry death to be read with 498A. But let's say if the husband dies or he commits suicide or if he's poisoned by the wife, then she can be charged under 302 or 304. I mean, there is nothing stopping the family if they think it's a case of homicide. If it's a case where a murder has been committed by the wife on the husband, or if the husband is throttled, or the wife drives over the husband, which may be a possibility, you can definitely file a case for 302. What is stopping you? So as I said, IPC is gender neutral, but people have made this. It is something like rote learning, रट्टा learning होती है ना कि हमारे समाज में ये नहीं हो रहा, तो ये नहीं हो रहा कर करके सब लोग उसी बात को दोहराने लगते हैं. तो I don't think that's how things happen. अगर बीवी पति का खून करेगी तो उस पर मर्डर चार्ज लगेगा ही लगेगा, और अगर बीवी हस्बैंड को अटेम्प्ट करती है मारने का तो सेक्शन 307 अटेम्प्ट टू मर्डर लगेगा ही लगेगा. I don't know why people don't talk about these things. IPC is already there. अंग्रेजों के जमाने से IPC हमारे पास.
So how is a husband or his family going to prove that something like that has happened? Because
autopsy will happen, madam. You will call 100 number, police will come, they will arrest, they will do the autopsy, it will go to the doctor. That's how any dead body is.
No. But how are they going to prove it? Because the laws are majorly like on women's side.
So I'll tell you this: if a wife dies, God forbid, if a wife dies, वाइफ की परिवार क्या कहता है, मेरी बेटी को मार दिया, मेरी बेटी को उठा लिया, यही लोग छाती पीटते हैं अपने देश में कह के, राइट? टेक द क्रॉलरी. अगर हस्बैंड मर जाता है तो उसकी फैमिली नहीं कह सकती मेरे बेटे को उठा लिया, मेरे बेटे को मार दिया इसने, एंड देन फाइल अ केस इन एफआईआर एंड लेट द पुलिस इन्वेस्टिगेट द मैटर, लेट द ऑटोप्सी बी डन. ट्रायल तो बात की बात है ना, ट्रायल इज द सेकंड स्टेज. लेट द एफआईआर बी लॉन्च्ड इन अ कंट्री इफ समबडी डाइज ऑफ अ नेचुरल डेथ. अननेचुरल डेथ इज होमिसाइड. अगर कोई छत से कूद जाए, सुसाइड नोट कर दे, सुसाइड होता है. अगर किसी का पति छत से कूद जाए, बोले कि आई एम writing this suicide note as my last note, and I was under tremendous stress because of my wife, because of my in-laws, then the wife and the in-laws also go under 302 in a suicide note. खत्म.
Right.
सुशांत सिंह का केस देख लीजिए, रिया चक्रवर्ती के साथ क्या हुआ है. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's a case of suicide where a lady is behind the bars. तो लॉ तो है ना आदमियों के लिए भी, कानून में कोई आदमी मरा था उस केस में, be it in a live-in relationship. Yeah.
Okay. So next question is, okay, this is as of now from my side as the last question. So although as of now we do not know the reality of Zomato case, but if the delivery boy is found innocent, and what actions can be taken to avoid such future incidents?
I think he has already filed a cross FIR. So there are two FIRs, one by Hitesha Chandrani and one by this guy, what's his name, the delivery boy. I'm forgetting his name. But they both filed cross FIR in the Bengaluru Electronic City Police Station. So it's pending investigation. I think the trial will happen. जो भी सही होगा उसको सजा मिलेगी, जो सही नहीं होगा जाएगा.
Yes. But my question is, what can we do to avoid such future incidents?
Madam, you can't. I mean, human beings are crazy people. Till the time human beings are there, crime is never going to subside. Crime is always going to happen. And look at every law around you. Whatever law you practice, whatever law you study is drafted by human beings, is drafted for human beings. So I don't think till the time human civilization exists, you can avoid such things. Things will always happen. Law will always keep evolving. And, lawyers will keep prospering because of this.
Okay, so while the Zomato case, this thing started, everyone on social media, they keep sharing stories, and we follow many people, around 1,000. So every second person shares that story or about a girl or a lady whenever it's when she uploads a video, something like that. but that thing is shared more rather than the story of the guy, the Zomato guy. Okay.
No, I think even Kamrat's story was shared, in equal manner. I keep seeing a lot of YouTube channels.
No,
So
I do that too.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the problem with social media trial is people do not think about the actual trial and how the actual courts are going to function and weigh the evidences, and they make their own channels just because they want TRP, they want more views and more likes. I think that is the wrong thing to do.
Yes, that is absolutely wrong. But since in the initial stage now, later people did share the story of the guy. Kamraj is his name, right?
Yes.
So later they did share it, but initially it was all about the lady, Hitesha.
Right.
So
look, she had the first mover advantage. She was a self-proclaimed
influencer.
She was a self-proclaimed Instagram influencer.
Yeah.
A video goes viral. Suddenly people say, look, let's hold on. Let's see what the guy has to say. He's a poor guy, he's a delivery boy. Then he was also interviewed.
Same people doing that thing.
Yeah, but look, in social media, everything is happening in nanoseconds, right? So for example, Hitesha's stories come today and Kamra's story comes day after. People think that they have lived their life for 100 years.
Right. Yeah.
So I think 2 days means 200 years. It's something like Hindu mythology. If you go to Brahmalok, if you spend a day here, it's like 100 years on earth. So that's not how it happens. So people are too consumed by, I think, social media and the social, whole halabaloo of this online circus which is going on. So I don't think that is trampling on either rights, madam. I don't think, it's an issue of male and female rights. It's the issue of are people trying to be, how should I put it? Too self-centric, too narcissistic, about their approach in life.
That's actually kind of very unfortunate about the youth of India, I would say, because they do not look at both the sides of the story. They usually just go in the one way and what's happening. Let's take the Sushant's example. Everyone was judging that girl, Riya, but we don't know as of now if he died because of her or not, if he was murdered or it was a suicide, but everyone was like it was a murder. So I don't think that should happen. But let's talk about the Zomato case again. I think ultimately the image of Zomato was influenced to some extent. People were targeting Zomato for their services and so on. So what can be done after that? So even after the guy wins the case, okay, in that case, so most of the people won't know as much as the Hitesha's story influenced other people. The Zomato side, or if the Zomato wins the case, okay, the guy wins the case, most people won't be aware of it, or they won't just get into it. So how are we going to avoid these things?
No, I think it's an unfair assumption. Look, I don't know for how long the trial is going to last. That is number one. Number two, if the Zomato guys ends up winning the case, what makes you think that Zomato is not going to publicize it? They're definitely, it's a big company, they're going to publicize the victory. If Hitesha wins it, they're definitely going to appeal it. But I think there will be a truce in between, and the case is going to get sorted and eventually going to get quashed. A big company doesn't want its reputation to be on the line. Secondly, practically nothing has changed. If you are hungry and if you don't want to cook, you will still order Zomato or Swiggy. I'll order Zomato or Swiggy. So I don't think, and I'm not going to blame a guy, or I'm not going to punch him, or I'm not going to shout at him till the time I'm a complete lunatic. That's not how things happen at the ground level. Yes, sometimes, on social media, social media is like a drug, right? It affects your brain. So you tend to believe that you're living in a dream world, but actual world works on a very different, parameters.
Right. So can we do, can Zomato or Swiggy, all these things can, put a recorder or a camera with them so that they know?
I don't think they're that cash rich, madam. Otherwise, most of the Zomato employees sometimes you see are on a bicycle, not even on a motorcycle. So they are not even proper employees on payroll. They are, I think, contractual employees is what I'm told. So I don't think if they don't have enough money to pay their contract people or the delivery boys, how will they keep the cameras? It's expensive affair.
Maybe even small recorder, because there were some cases in Uber and Ola of raping women or something like that, but that didn't really actually happen. So if they put the dash cam or something other than that, so that such incidents can be avoided.
Camera is not a solution. In a husband and wife scenario, people keep recording each other's voice secretly. Even in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, they keep recording, documenting everything on Instagram, Snapchat, I don't know what not. But does that mean that breakups don't happen? Does that mean that crime doesn't happen? Does that mean that people are not cheating on other people? Does that mean
No.
people are not getting into adultery? Things are happening. As I told you, human psyche and human civilization, what happened 1,000 years ago still is being continued to do so, and the future is going to be no different. Technology doesn't make us different. Technology only enables us to do things differently.
Right. Okay, so that was my last question. There are some more questions by our participants. So the first question is, to what extent number of false reports by women have been increased?
I think it keeps increasing, every year. And I don't know whether they're false or they are true, but people are becoming more aware of their legal rights. People are on smartphones more. People know what to Google, how to approach the police. People are more educated, more aware, more sure-footed as to whether they should litigate or not litigate. So I don't think we should worry about the increasing number of cases. I think if somebody has been wrong, absolutely please come forward and lodge your complaint. If it's a false complaint, I think if you're a man, then please fight tooth and nail against a false complaint. As I said, provisions in law apply, fairly and squarely to everybody. So, just pick the right lawyer for the right advice is all I'm going to say. If you do not know the law and every article is going to say, that there are no laws for men, no laws for men, people will end up believing that there are no laws for men. And if I tell you something differently, you will think I'm a wizard of a lawyer, which I'm not. I'm just a law student like you. And, I just keep studying the same books that you study. It's just a matter of being a little more meticulous, in your approach and being a little more methodical as a lawyer and give the right advice to your clients.
Right. So usually I've seen this thing around me or my friends that whenever some girl accuses the person that I'll file an FIR against you, I'll file a fake FIR against you or something like that. She clearly says that thing. Okay, I've seen one incident like that right in front of me that she says that I'll accuse of rape and I'll accuse you of molestation. And then somewhat that guy gets, scared. He gets scared. So what he can do in such cases? What would you suggest to do him?
Madam, this is advice for which I'll charge my clients. And I'll have to give it free on a webinar, which is later going to go on YouTube. I think it's going to hit my business. So all I'm going to say is you can always come and contact me and I can give you advice in private, because sometimes, these are very sensitive issues. But one thing I can tell you is please read section 377 of IPC. It applies as much to a man as to a woman. And that is a section that you can use, irrespective of whatever gender you are.
We need to promote section 377 as much as we are promoting fundamental rights.
Why not? Absolutely. And if you are a boy and if a girl threatens you for rape, why can't you go to a police station and say that you were sodomized by the girl? What is stopping you? It's only an allegation. It's one allegation against the other allegation.
Most of the people doesn't really want to, get into all these troubles.
See, it's a matter of whether you will go to jail if a 376 is lodged against you, or will you make the other person go to jail if you lodge a 377. And that's a call that you have to take. And if it has happened to you, please go to the police station. If it hasn't happened to you, stop filing false cases. And that's all I'm going to say.
I'm going to write about 376 and 377. Okay. So the next question is, what can be a possible solution to this issue while also ensuring delivery of justice to the actually aggrieved people? If we can talk about this topic openly in a webinar, why there are no actions being taken against the same?
Because not everybody is a lawyer. When you go to file a complaint, you are going to a police station. When you come to a lawyer, police gives you problem, lawyers give you solutions. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Law in these matters should be rigid or flexible. I guess
Madam, law has to be rigid. If laws are not rigid, people will be too flexible to flout the law, and that's what they even end up doing on a normal basis. So we need strong laws, we need strong implementation of laws, and we need stricter punishment sometimes to ensure that the society is safe and sound.
Do you think somewhere our laws are more flexible towards women?
I don't think so, madam. I think they need protection, and they are being given the right protection. And as I said, I represent both husbands and wife, and even for husbands, I have 3-4 tricks always up my sleeve to go against the wife should the need arise. So I think it's a matter of what type of lawyer you go to and what type of legal advice do you get. And there are enough laws by the High Courts and Supreme Court of our country, which are both very, I would say, gender neutral laws. So you need to read those judgments. You need to implement those judgments in your day-to-day practice while advising client.
Okay, so And the next question, is feminism biased to the society?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, so these days I've been noticing that feminism is more about, I would rather call it a fake feminism, but whatever. They're more like reduce the image of man and empower more women in a very wrong way. So most of the women influencers have been doing this. So actually, what feminism is, men and women. But what these days girls are doing is women and men.
I think we must strive towards equality for everybody. I think the day that we are able to achieve that in all our minds, I think that would be a day when we would have a utopian society. As I said, I mean, it's always very difficult to create a level-headed, level playing field for everyone. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that things will be normal in the times to come. You are the youth. You have to take the reins and march forward.
I hope we'll be able to create a better society for the future generation. Okay, so there are some questions in the chat box. We'll continue with that. Okay, so the first question is, how far are the authorities responsible for the misuse of laws by few women in their matrimonial matters? Nowadays, it is common practice in district courts that women, aside from approaching the judiciary, are also approaching NCW. Furthermore, few women also threat their husbands and in-laws in the name of judicial intervention. Also taking example of Sarvajit Singh case, which took multiple years, what can we say about the role of judiciary and system in the misuse of these laws?
I think had judiciary not been there, he would not have been acquitted. So judiciary is doing the role that it has always done. It has always been, as unbiased as possible. People create problem for other people, and they are called litigants. We are the lawyers. We are the mouthpieces for these litigants, and we have to ensure that as an officer of the court, we have extremely delicate balance to, not only represent our client but also be honest to the court. And I think lawyers are doing their job fantastically. Judges are doing their job in a perfect manner. I think I can't tell people to stop fighting because they will still stop fighting. I can't tell people not to marry because they'll end up marrying. And despite marrying, they'll still fight people. I can't tell the youth not to make girlfriends and boyfriends. They're still going to be in a relationship. I can't tell anybody not to have Bumble, Tinder, or Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. These dating apps. If I tell you don't go on social dating apps, we'll still do that. If I tell you not to drink and not to booze, not to commit crime, or not to drive rashly, you'll still end up doing that because we have our own notions of our sensibilities. So my telling you will not change a thing, but my telling something to the court in a manner which is conducive, in a manner which is appealing, in a manner which is lawful, will certainly make a difference. And that's what happened in Sarabjit's case or in any other case in which the person has rightly been acquitted in this country. So I don't think people should be too quick to blame the judiciary. I think judiciary is doing a wonderful job of its duties. I think you have to first look at why the allegations were leveled against you, if they were at all.
Okay. So next question is, how SC guidelines followed by the police when statute has been disappeared?
I don't understand the question completely, but I think the guidelines by the Supreme Court are being followed, in letter and spirit. There are CAW cells. There is, stop to the pre-arrest right before the FIR. There is a proper CAW cell which conducts mediation, as I said in one of the previous questions. So I think the guidelines are being adhered properly, and you also have to realize that the police also needs to do its job. So if a woman goes to a police station with let's say with bruises on her hand, and with a medical paper saying that I was bruised or badly beaten by my husband or by or my in-law, the police has to register FIR. You cannot turn that woman away from the police station.
Right. Okay. So the next question is, under which section civil defamation can be filed?
And you'll have to file a suit for either what is this? Not a specific sections, but you'll have to file the suit for either recovery or for specific performance, depending how much damage you are claiming.
Okay. In the prenups, which are kind of a safeguard to the assets of spouse, creates an air of mistrust in the foundation of a pious union of two individuals. Even though the legal standpoints in India on the prenuptials being not valid, still there exists an alternative of affidavits between husband and wife. How is this plays out in courts?
It's not accepted because prenups again are doesn't have a legal sanctity in the country. There is no formal law for this promoting this. America, it's very common, but even if you sign an affidavit, it doesn't work out. You'll have to still litigate in the courts and decide about which portion goes to whom. If there are common properties or common bank accounts which are jointly shared by the by the parties.
Okay, so this was the last question. And it's also time to end our webinar. So towards the end, I would like to invite Mr. Bhumesh Verma. So please get a vote of thanks from your side.
Thank you everyone for joining us for this first webinar under the aegis of Glolex Liga. An interesting and very engaging discussion with Jayant. Thanks so much, Jayant. You need no introduction. You are a youth icon in legal fraternity with regular sharing of your knowledge and inputs. I see hundreds and thousands of likes and comments on your post within minutes, whenever you post anything. Now, laws are always enacted for protection of the oppressed, tortured, and the one against whom a wrong has taken place. However, as we keep observing throughout the legislative history, most laws are prone to being misused. There are bad apples everywhere, be it tenancy laws, labor laws, Me Too instances, and so on. So it was great to hear Jayant explaining the intricacies of women-centric laws, instances of misuse as well. There are instances where you see such laws being misused to settle scores and put husband and at times poor, old, and innocent in-laws behind bars, making a social dent on their reputation, irretrievable damage. While practicing in court, I have seen such instances quite frequently, but as Jen said, there are ways and means to salvage the situation. You need a good lawyer to represent you. I'm sure Glolex Liga fraternity and audience will benefit from your insights into different subjects. Now on, Jen, to the participants, I'd say this is just the beginning as far as Glolex Liga is concerned. Do let us know the topics you'd like to hear experts on, or even share your knowledge and expertise. Hope to see you very soon for our next session. Thank you very much, everyone, and particularly Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So with this, we take leave. See you soon. Thanks, Neha, for conducting.
Towards the end, I did like to tell all the members that I've updated the Glolex Liga email ID in the chat box, which is info@glolexliga.com. You can also contact Mr. Bhumesh Verma, sir, and me, Neha Dadij, on LinkedIn or on Instagram, wherever you feel comfortable. And we'll be happy to help you. And we're looking forward to you be a part of Glolex Liga, because you'll get many more opportunities like this in future. We'll also be conducting more webinars with Janser as well and different topics. So stay connected and be there. Okay, this was a very nice session, Janser. And I'd like to take a leave now. A very good evening, a very good night to everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.